Okay, calling roll. Trevor McLear.
Here.
Michael Abuzerol.
Here.
Meltree Sharp. Keith Lippman. Katie Gallagher. Michael Chambers. Okay.
Okay, then you just identify Sal when he comes in, and when Sal comes, do you have to do anything to?
I'll reflect it in the minutes that he is here.
So item 3, public comment related to items on the agenda. Obviously, nobody, Corey? Okay. So item 4, we need a motion to approve the minutes for our June 13th, 2024 meeting.
So moved.
Second. All right. All in favor of approving the minutes for the June 13th, 2024 meeting, say aye. Aye. All right. Opposed? All right. So item 5, the member reappointment or the member appointment. So again, my term is up at the end of this year. To audit committee, I still have not had any discussion at all with the county executive about the potential reappointment, so it'll still stay on the agenda. Item 6, executive session. So we will go into executive session, but I'm going to move it to the end of the meeting, and we'll just deal with the formalities at that point in time. Item 7A, the follow-up items from the second quarter meeting. So I'll turn that over to Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Buzerol. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for everyone for coming today, especially Mr. Libman. I know he changed his whole schedule around just to be here this morning. Agenda item 7A, follow-up items from the second quarter meeting. List of the follow-up items were included in your agenda packet of materials. This was numbered as attachment A-7.A. I do want to note I made one minor change to the follow-up items list, which is shown in the item agenda as number 1. All follow-up items that are also on the agenda are listed here with item number 1 on the follow-up list. So I just tried to condense this down a little bit so we don't have multiple pages of tables here. So the grants management update, county charter revisions, audit committee charter revisions, 2024 goals update are all on the agenda as agenda items. So therefore, I won't go into detail here on those updates, but I do want to list them here since they have been mentioned as follow-up items in the past. So that's item number 1. Unless anyone has any questions on the presentation, I'll move on to the item number 2. Follow-up item number 2 includes 2 areas of focus. These both related to HR payroll review. Number 1 is the IG status of continuous monitoring. I did speak with Inspector General Beeler on the IG's continuous monitoring efforts. They're still working on some processes and do not have a great update for the committee right now. I'm aware of tests that they are running for HR continuous monitoring for payroll. She said to follow up with her towards the end of the year on the status of their work, as we could potentially discuss any continuous monitoring on our end without duplicating their efforts. So they still are working through a few kinks with IT and HR and some of the data that they are gathering through their IDEA continuous monitoring data analysis. So they're still working through a few things that I don't have a great update for you this meeting, but I would recommend we keep this on as a follow-up meeting if the committee is okay with that. Item number 2 is part of the follow-up list here in item number 2, overpayment language in the union contracts. So I want to thank Senior Auditor Tom Schneider here for reviewing 5 union contracts that were renewed as of January 1st of 2024. All 5 of those contracts had recoup language, overpayment language for union employees that receive more pay than authorized in the union contract. I do commend the work from HR and Law Department for developing this process and including language in the union contracts going forward. So that language you can see here, which would give the right to recoup overpayment of any overpayments on payroll expenses. Okay, follow-up item number 3. This was to discuss the update to council. Councilman Sweeney is the chair of the committee where the update is normally presented. I have been in contact with him, but I ain't able to meet with him officially to discuss the update as their council is currently or was in recess during August. He said he will reach out to me, but I have it on my calendar to follow up with him in the next week here to get an update on what that update to council looks like for this year.
Is that something that you want to wait? I mean, I know you weren't here for the update you would be providing. Do you want to do that? Or would you prefer the written update that was already submitted speak for itself and then maybe come in at the new year or something like that, just to, in front of the committee, or what are you thinking?
So I know in the past that the actual update to council, the report that we send to council has satisfied that requirement. I know over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been an actual presentation. I'm okay with either or. I would personally prefer not to give an update on prior years' requirements because I was not here and it's not my work, but if council does want me to come and give an update, I would be happy to during a meeting.
Okay.
So I guess we certainly can discuss this as a committee. My preference would still be the actual physical presentation of the report with hopefully council's understanding that you're presenting somebody else's work. I think having Josh there with you would be very, very helpful, but that's my perspective. I don't know how everybody else feels about that. So I guess the two options are just, be satisfied via the written report, or in addition to that, we ask Corey and Josh to present it to the county council as we've done historically. So my preference would be, just because of the amount of work that gets done by the department and the committee and the work that goes into the report, I think a presentation of that is helpful, but.
I don't have a strong feeling about it. I think it makes, your recommendation makes sense. And it strikes me that's a way for there to be dialogue that could occur in that format that might not occur if just a written report were submitted.
My only comment would be, are there any updates to the update, right? Have you gone through it? Are you comfortable with what's being presented?
I would be comfortable with what's being presented. It looks very similar to the same report that we did 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
I just can't speak to the details of the information in the report. I mean, I'd be okay going through how the committee is in compliance or was in compliance. There's no update to the actual information in there just because this is all 2023 activity and audits. But I would be okay. I would be okay presenting on what's in the report. I know there's additional work that needs to be done, like a presentation that I feel as the department without a staff member, we might serve better with the actual audit plan. We trying to get through the audit plan rather than going through a presentation and developing that PowerPoint. But if council or the committee would like me to present on that report, I'd still be happy to do that.
So you never did find a PowerPoint I thought the prior director said she had done a PowerPoint.
No, I believe the discussion, maybe Josh can help me here, was if the date was set before June 30th, there would be a PowerPoint created. I did not see a draft PowerPoint.
Just a quick question for Trevor. I know Monica had mentioned at the last 2 meetings that she was trying to reach out to Councilman Sweeney about the presentation, and she hadn't heard anything. Do you, okay.
No, go ahead, finish that.
Just didn't know if it was a priority to him then.
Yeah, I think there was a date scheduled, but then it didn't work out.
Okay.
One of them. Had to move it and then gonna kick it till after July 1.
So different. And I would want it to happen, so I don't know how everybody else feels. I don't want to how do we handle this? Do we gotta do a formal straw, I don't want a straw poll, but I don't want to, how do we do this here? Okay, you guys want to do the vote? All right. Well, so all in favor of asking Corey to physically present the update to council report, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. No, noes? All right, so if you can get a schedule and you can present it, that would be the preference. If you can't get a schedule, then we've done our best and.
I was gonna ask, what if Councilman Sweeney says it's not necessary this year.
Then we've done our, we've done our best.
job,
yeah.
okay.
I don't think that'll be a problem.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. Moving on to follow-up item number 4. Follow-up item number 4 is a review of language in the county contracts. I did review contracts passed by council that were related to the ARPA funds awarded to local governments over the past few years. I will say that these, and I have that included here, the language, these agreements actually include language on making documents available to the county if requested, including cooperating with an audit from Department of Internal Audit and an investigation from the Inspector General. I was also able to find similar language in non-government contracts. I had actually, Josh was able to find in 3, I'm going to bring it up here for you, because this was recently found before I sent out the agenda items. Josh was able to review 3 contracts approved by council that were non-grant awarded to local governments, and there is also a clause, I don't know when it was actually added in here, it's not specific to the Department of Internal Audit, but I feel this at least satisfies the requirement that if the county and its designated agents for purpose of audit and examination upon reasonable request during the term of this contract and for a period of 2 years, they have to make all pertinent books and records available. So I feel that that could satisfy that if Department of Internal Audit through the county as the designated agent were to request records and financials specific to county funds that were awarded through the contract, that we'd be able to use this clause. There is, during the term of the contract and for a period of 2 years from the expiration, that is similar to the contract language that is in the ARPA funds agreements as well. So I don't know when this was added. I could ask the law department, but we were able to find, at least in these 3 contracts approved in June and July, that there is a form of what I would call audit clause in there.
So who would own that decision here at the county about whether or not this language would be in a contract or not? Is it the procurement department? Is it the fiscal office? Is it the law department?
I would say the law department. It would be the law department and that would own that, yeah.
So, I mean, it would be helpful to have this language in every contract or or the majority of the contracts, whether or not the county exercises it or not, just to have the capability of being able to do it, I think is just a good practice. So I don't know who would have that happen, but it would be good,
Yeah.
I think a good practice.
I can talk to the law director to make sure this language is in all the contracts, at least from the grant agreements for local governments, distributed to local governments, and the contracts that we reviewed here that were not to local governments. The language appears to be in all those contracts. So I would assume that this is just common language being added to every contract, but I'll confirm that with the law director. Okay. Follow-up item number 5, it will be a presentation on the bank reconciliation audit report. I'm going to bring up the presentation here. The presentation is attached for anyone that's looking at their computer as A-7.A.5 in your agenda materials. And I want to thank Lee Tucker and Lennon Taylor too for being here for not only this presentation, but for the grants update as well. Oops, sorry. Okay. So I won't go into all the details on the history of the county bank reconciliation. I think everyone here is well aware of the struggles to reconcile the system to the bank for many years up until the 2022 external audit. Since 2022, the county has implemented a new accounting system and approximately $2.2 million was written off from the books. The fiscal office has established a new process for the bank reconciliation to ensure accurate and timely monthly reconciliation over the last few years. Following the 2022 external financial audit, which removed the bank reconciliation comment from the audit report. The Department of Internal Audit performed procedures in 2024 to ensure the adequacy, completeness, and accuracy of the bank reconciliation process. Overall, in our report, we concluded the bank reconciliation process was greatly improved, and the fiscal office has established a timely reconciliation on a monthly basis. We did have two findings in the report related to outstanding checks, unclaimed funds, and documenting the review of the bank reconciliation, 2 findings and 3 recommendations, as you can see in the results summary. Although the fiscal office has reconciled the county's books since implementation of the new system, there are identified cash account differences in the general ledger from the legacy system, famous, that still need to be cleaned up. With the new system and to help reconcile monthly, the fiscal office created a cash account for every bank account. But there are still old cash account transactions that are identified and need to be researched thoroughly to a specific cash account in the new system. Let me get down here for tracking. And these known differences are being tracked separately on the reconciliation, need to be researched further once the fiscal office has more time and staff to perform the research. So I wanted to show on the presentation how these are being tracked separately. The net book balance, I tried to put tables in here to paint a better picture rather than saying in words. The net book balance of $1 million in the old cash GL, which is account 11,000, will eventually be reallocated to a specific cash account within Lawson, which is the Lawson cash accounts, which is identified per bank account. This $1 million is being tracked separately, and that's why I wanted to show it at least on this table, that this is a separate accounting of the old cash GL. From my review and my understanding, and speaking with Lee and her team, is that this is just tracked separately. I mean, really, the fiscal office could potentially ignore this and just keep it on the books as old cash accounts, because the new cash accounts going forward, all new activity is being reconciled on a monthly basis. The difference is $0 per month. They're timely reconciling. The $1 million in book balances here is all identified cash accounts that need to be reallocated down to the Lawson cash accounts. So they are keeping track of this separately. They have a whole spreadsheet where they have all the cash accounts that need to be reviewed further. It's very detailed. They have identified when they found the difference, what they need to go look at, and what needs to be reviewed. They just don't have the staff, the time currently to go back, review the specific transactions in what would be the famous transactions, to reallocate those to specific bank accounts that are in the new system, new Lawson cash accounts. The old cash account differences of the $1 million also includes the $2.2 million write-off, and this is what I'm showing down here. The actual $2.2 million was written off. It's just not associated with a current bank account. So they have to reallocate it down to a bank account once they review all the transactions from these old cash accounts that they have listed on a separate spreadsheet, a separate reconciliation, I would call it.
Okay, so I have to ask a question here, because my head is spinning a little bit.
I know.
Spinning just a bit. So, all right, so in any, okay, well, you go ahead, I'll let you.
No, I was,
Okay.
go ahead with your questions, because I'll probably spin you even
Okay.
further. It's a little complicated.
All right.
So basically what it is that initially when we did, prior to splitting out all the accounts, there was one cash account that's hence the consolidated reconciliation. And the cash account was 11,000. I think it was in 22, probably back in February, we started splitting out every single account into a separate sub-account. So, for example, the payroll account is 11,100, The accounts payable is 11,200, and so nothing in theory should sit in 11,000 anymore. There were transactions that we couldn't, when we started splitting them out, we couldn't specifically identify. We knew it's cash because it's in the books on 11,000, and it's part of our reconciliation that we have been doing every single month. We just didn't specifically know which cash account it belonged to because there were transactions that when it came in from the bank, that's why we started just documenting all the transactions, the date that it occurred, what that transaction was, so that we could, when we went back to allocate it, we can identify which account it was. There's probably, I don't know how many transactions there are, but there are quite a few transactions that sit at the top of the house that hasn't been allocated to the sub-account. But it is a cash account, it is recorded appropriately, it's just not in the specific account. It's just in a generic cash account because that 11,000 is basically an unassigned cash account. But in theory, because we have split out all the accounts, that account balance should be zero. But there's transactions that still sit there.
We, so I met with Lee and Lennon and
Shannon.
in the fiscal office a couple weeks ago, and we went through what this would look like as far as what entries need to be made to reallocate it down, and it all came out to zero. So reallocating the transactions here to reallocate the write-off, the 11,000 cash code reconciliation, which is the book balance here, is reallocated all down through the new bank accounts. The difference will still be zero. So as you can see here in the old cash account, there's no bank balance. So it's just the book balance that needs to be reallocated down to the cash accounts. Now, they're just keeping track of it separately, and it's because they want to assure financial accuracy. I mean, they could just keep it there and not do anything with it.
So, yeah, but that, the intent is to actually make 11,000. We had a person that was working on it. They probably were here with us for 6 months, and then they left the county. So that's why it hasn't really actually been reallocated. They've been gone since, I believe, the end of December, beginning of January. So we've been without an extra resource, and we've been trying to hire a resource. But Lennon has got some other folks to work on the bank reconciliation with our special projects manager team so that we can get this cleared no later than the first quarter of 2025.
So just to be sure I understand, I think it was a good explanation, thank you. The other side of the transaction of the $1 million, we have been able to verify were valid receipts or disbursements, because I presume these go both ways.
Right.
This is strictly just an general ledger bank account.
Correct. So it's between the 11,000.
Reconciliation that needs to be done.
Correct. Because what happened, so I'll give you an example to hopefully help clarify anybody that still has any questions about it. So once we set up the new accounts, Treasury posts their side of the bank transactions. So, say for instance, there was a transaction for interest, and the interest, they were still posting it to 11,000, but the interest actually belonged to our escrow account. So it didn't go to the 11,500 escrow account. It posted to 11,000 when it should have been sent to the escrow account. So we left it in the 11,000 and noted that it's an escrow adjustment, and we just left it there at the top of the house because that's where Treasury put the entry. Now, if we had the time and the resources, what we should have done once it posted there, probably within the next 3 to 4 weeks while we're doing the reconciliation, somebody should have gone back to move the transaction from 11,000 to 11,500. Now, pause. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. I do
Okay.
have a question.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions.
Mhm.
So is the 11,000 account, is it still open? It sounds like it's still open for posting.
We do still, the 11,000, we didn't close it, correct? Yeah, we didn't close the 11,000 for posting because there's some transactions that are transactions that post from the system to 11,000, but we tried to draw the line in the sand. There's no transactions that currently hit 11,000 that we haven't cleaned up. The transactions are basically from 2023. Most of the transactions are from 2023. So At this point, everybody is cleared, like, do not post anything to 11,000, like adjustments that come in from the bank. So if Treasury, they don't post that anymore, so they will call, if they have any questions, they can't determine where it goes. Either we will fix it on the back end, or Treasury will call immediately, stop what they're doing, and they'll call us to verify whether transaction posts. But there's really there's not a lot of activity, if I can, I would have to go through my notes, but there's not a lot of activity that's occurred currently in 2024 that post to 11,000.
Because the intent is to not use 11,000.
Correct.
So
That is the
eventually,
intent.
we're going to get to a point where
Right.
we're not going to allow posting and anything that needs to happen in the
Correct.
background to prevent it will be
Correct,
done.
right. So we would have to work with IT as well, because like payroll entries, for example, get posted to 11,000. Automated payroll entries when payroll occurs, and we need to readjust that as well, but we catch that now, you know.
Because
on
you
the
have to
front
use
end.
manpower to then go reallocate it to
Correct,
the proper
correct.
sub-account.
Mhm, mhm.
How old are the transactions in 11,000? How
Let's
far
see.
back do they date?
Let's see. I think I have it with me. There's some stuff from 2022, and it goes to the last, well, actually, there's 3 transactions, they're small dollars from March of 2024, but they go through December of 2023, and there's no transactions after that. There's 3 transactions from March of 2024. It looks like the total is $3,100.
Okay, and so this is more of a comment, I'm sure the answer is yes, but you've sorted this volume-wise to
Correct.
handle the ones that are larger, to figure out their allocations
Correct.
first. Okay.
Yep.
Is the $2.2 million that the county wrote off a couple years ago, still the right number to have written off?
Correct. That's why Corey tried to show when he did his summary that it's 0, because if you look at the amount of the current book balance is $1.6 million, and then if you actually zeroed out the account so that it would be 0, the transactions total, you take out the reallocation of the 2.2, you take out the current book balance, the transactions that need to be reallocated is the 1.2 million, and all of the transactions on our spreadsheet total the 1.2 million.
Okay, it's still a little odd to me, and I'm trying to understand, and thank you for the presentation, that if we wrote this balance off, so my recollection of this whole history is this $2.2 million has been a long-standing issue at the county, going back to whenever, which meant nobody could really try to figure out the details behind it. So we wrote it off.
Correct.
So I'm still having a hard time understanding, if it was written off, why is it still being, in some form or fashion, being accounted for on the current reconciliation?
So in theory, the $2 million that was written off is the difference between the bank and the book balance. So what has been done by the internal team is just that every single transaction is housed there, because in theory, the 2.274 million that's set at the top of the house, once we start reallocating, you're not going to see this amount on there, and it probably shouldn't be shown like this. That probably should just be off, and then you should probably just have the remaining transactions of the 1.2 million, but then the current book balance would be different. It's kind of convoluted, but in theory, they just recorded, prior to them doing the write-off, back in July of 2022, all transactions, they just kind of recorded all transactions that weren't specific, that they could specifically identify. Now, the write-off amount brought us in balance with the bank balance. But in theory, the 2.274, I believe, is still like this, because we don't know which account it goes to. But once the reallocation occurs, it will zero out, because the current book balance will be 0. The transactions of 1.212 million will all be reallocated, and there will be nothing left in the account. I don't.
Mike?
I mean, it's not a transaction.
To bring the. So it should zero itself out, correct?
Right, yeah. My understanding with the 2.2 million, Mike, is that it was written off to cash, reduced cash out of the 11,000 account. But now it needs to be reallocated to a specific bank account. So it has to sit there as an identified transaction that needs to be reallocated down.
Now, if.
But can I
right.
just add, in reality, since we could never reconcile the transactions that made up the $2.2 million, because they were so old, how in the world are we really going to now get the detail to know what bank account it really belongs to?
So because. it's-
Isn't this just sort of a
No, because
decision that
it's-
ought to be made and done and?
Well, that's part of, but it sits at the top of the house. So once all the transactions are reallocated, that will be part of the balance and number at the top of the house to get it to zero. Because the write-off, in theory, if we knew, then we would know, right? We
Yeah.
wouldn't have to have a write-off. We would know where it goes and how to better research it, but we don't. So once we do the write-off of the once we do the cleanup, in theory, there should be probably like sitting at the top of the house still, $2.2 million.
Right.
So everything else will be reallocated, and the offset to that $2 million will be the $2 million that's left from the reallocation, and then it will be zero. So it'll be does that make a little, is that a little bit clearer?
Lee, can I ask you,
Uh-huh.
the 2.2 million that we
Mhm.
wrote off in 2022,
Correct.
this is a different 2.2 million, or we're talking about the same 2.2?
This is the same, this is the write-off amount, yeah.
So how did the auditors sign off on clearing that balance without having this side of the transaction done,
I'll have on which side of the transaction done.
the reallocation?
So
So
without the
we-
reallocation.
We wrote off the 2.2 million
Mhm.
in 2022.
Correct.
But we didn't fully make all the transactions that are necessary to write it off?
No, so if you look at our reconciliation, I'm not sure that I'll make myself clear, but if you look at if you look at our cash reconciliation, we have all the accounts, we show the bank balance, the book balance, and any type of adjustments that's needed. And then we show like if there's any differences. And we have all the items identified. So the $2.2 million was an amount that shows as unreconciled, but everything else has been identified and clearly listed out. So the $2 million that shows as an open item, that's the only open item that showed at the time that the auditor signed off. And then we have all the other transactions listed, they tick and tied. We provided some type of proof similar to what we provided to internal audit, and they were comfortable that all items have been identified, except the 2.2 million that we're saying that we need to reconcile. So if you look at, I probably should have done a PowerPoint, but if you look at the current book balance is a credit of $1 million. The amount that needs to be reallocated is actually $1.2 million. That's a debit. So the difference between the current book balance, excluding the write-off, is the $1.2 million that needs to be reallocated. And we have all the $1.2 million that needs to be reallocated. So once that's reallocated, there will still be the $2 million that sits at the top of the house that needs to come off the current. It will be zero. I'm still thinking, like, I'm not sure that you guys understand, but let me see if I can explain.
Let me try to help, because I think I understand.
Yes.
So essentially, once she reallocates the 1.2 to all of the sub-accounts.
Mhm.
So to answer your question, I believe the way that the reason why the auditor was able to move on and approve it is because they're looking at it from a total. And they're saying from a total perspective, that 2.2 million, once that's reconciled, once that's reallocated, we're good, right? There's a zero difference. And so once she reallocates that 1.2 to each of the sub-accounts, then that $2 million write-off is still at the top. Well, the sub-accounts are then gonna say, these are the unreconciled items in each of these sub-accounts. So those unreconciled items is how she's gonna reallocate that 2.2 to each of the sub-accounts. So when you do a reconciliation, you have the bank balance, and then you have the book balance. You have everything that cleared from a deposit, everything that cleared from checks. Then you have outstanding checks, and you have deposits in transit. So the ones that they know are owed and they shouldn't be on the books, those are gonna yell at her. So she'll be able to allocate that 2 million across those sub-accounts. Am I?
Not quite. So-
Not quite?
No,
Okay,
not
maybe.
quite.
Okay.
So, okay, so the current amount that sits on our books in 11,000 is a credit of 1,061,000. That's the amount that's sitting in 11,000. The amounts that need to be reallocated is 1,212,261. That's gonna be reallocated out. Once you do the reallocation, the amount that will be the current book balance will be zero, because the write-off will go away. So the write-off isn't really gonna be reallocated out. That's the amount that we don't know what it is, right? We don't know what that is. So the current, once the $1.2 million write-off, I'm sorry, not the write-off, the $1.2 million worth of transactions is reallocated down, the balance on the books will, for 11,000 will be zero. So that's not gonna be reallocated. We just left it there so that we know like how much. So if, Corey, do you have that?
I was gonna, are you okay with me bringing it up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a little bit more
Might as
than,
well.
but you. No, it's 1.2 million. So Corey's gonna bring it up.
Yeah, this might
Yeah.
make more sense if we
Hopefully
do
this will
this.
explain it a
I
little
know,
bit better.
but for sake of time here on the meeting, I guess we get into some details. Do we want to get into the details? I mean, the whole purpose of internal audit, from my perspective of doing this audit, was for us to get comfortable on the reconciliation process. I think internal audit's telling us, even though maybe we don't understand it, that the process is okay. We can either try to get into this level of detail, or we can just assume that the internal audit department understands it better than we do, and they're telling us that it's, I mean, I don't know how you want to, it's still, I've asked this question 3 or 4 times outside of this meeting, and I still don't understand it. So we can continue to try to.
I believe I am convinced that in the aggregate, the bank reconciliation process works, and the adjustment that needed to be made for the $2.1 million write-off, or 2.2, whichever it was, is done. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I think what I understand is that although within the consolidation of the cash accounts, we're fine and we're reconciled, there's still some allocation between the accounts to be recorded. I don't know how you're gonna do that. It seems to me it's gonna have to be arbitrary, but I'm not
And
sure.
we'll
that
walk
it-
internal audit through it
But,
as well.
but I'm not sure that it's worthy of more of our time. To Sal's question with regard, how did the external auditors get comfortable with it? The balance sheet item is the aggregate cash, the accumulation of all the cash accounts, and they were comfortable on that basis. I'm pretty satisfied personally.
And we did walk Corey through our work and his team and Jeremy as well. We walked him through like this spreadsheet. We
Yeah, as
walked
you
him
can
through
see,
our
there's a lot to
detail.
walk through.
And we showed him like what it would look like, and he was comfortable.
Yeah, we went over what those
Of course, when we
entries
clean
would
it
look
up,
like.
when it's all clean, we'll walk you through that again to
Right.
make sure that you're still comfortable with
And
it.
I just wanted to note too, if you, in the report, it is mentioned that we're including this in our follow-up tracker. So a year from now, even sooner, if you get the time to make those reallocations or make any changes to this old cash account, we're gonna continue to follow up with fiscal until this is all addressed.
Okay. What's the timeline again?
We hope to have it done by first quarter of 2025. We think hopefully we'll get some resources in. If we don't, Lennon has committed some of his resources to work on it with the special projects manager.
I mean, the one thing that I want to make sure is not happening, and I, just so in fairness to you, I've asked this question, I want to make sure that there, because it's my understanding that these transactions that are sitting in this account have gotten into this account after you did the write-off, right? You said
Correct, that's
22,
why they're segregated like that,
Right,
correct,
so-
yes,
So these are transactions that ended up in this account after we did the write-off.
correct. Mhm.
And I just want to make sure that we are not that those transactions that are in there are being researched and accounted for correctly and not being written off or adjusting the $2.2 million, which is how it appears to me in my way of understanding. I just gotta
That's
make
probably why it should have been presented a little bit differently prior to us, you know, even working with Corey. Is the $2 million write-off should not really be there. It should be just like the transactions that need to be reallocated, but, I mean, it's presented like it is at this point, but, yeah,
And
I agree with that.
I spoke to the external auditors too, in July about, their process and their review, and, you know, they took it out of the audit report in 2022. So they were just similar to us. They were comfortable with the process in place. They've been reconciled with the new system. They just have these extra transactions that need to be reallocated throughout the cash. In total, they're looking at total, just like what Keith mentioned, in total, they're reconciled. They understand enough that these are identified cash balances, transactions that need to be reallocated. So they didn't go as thorough as we did, but they're comfortable with the process. They're comfortable with these are identified transactions and cash balances that need to be reallocated, and that's the reason why it was taken out of the audit report.
And we'll work on presentment as well, so that it's a little cleaner and easier to understand, because it's pretty complicated and it doesn't look the best, so we'll work on that as well.
And we'll continue to update the audit committee too, if there's any changes. From our review over the last 6 months, there hasn't been any changes to this old cash account.
Thank you.
So are you done on the follow-up items?
No, that is all from the follow-up items.
All right, so,
Thank you.
so
Thank
just
you.
two quick follow-up questions to you, Corey. On the HR employee payroll review, so the work that the Inspector General's office is doing and the update that they're gonna provide for you, will that update be provided for you in time for you to consider payroll as you're developing the 2025 audit plan?
I'm hoping for that. It might be a consideration you might have to make in 2025. As I know in the past, the audit plan's been approved in March. So even by then, if there's anything we can add to the audit plan as far as continuous monitoring for HR or payroll, we'll consider it then. She gave me a deadline to follow up in December. I'll shoot for November just to see if we can get that in time for the audit plan to be developed, but that's my goal.
And then I guess it's a similar question for you regarding the audit language clause that's in the certain contracts. So what's the county doing, not your department, but what's the county doing with the language that's included in the stimulus contracts? Are county departments supposed to be executing the right to audit? Is anybody at the county taking advantage of that language, I guess, in those contracts?
I read this as either Inspector General or internal audit can take advantage of the language in there, or at a request from a department or county council, we could pursue that. But again, that has to be added to the audit plan as well.
Okay.
So I think that language could be used or interpreted in two different ways as far as who can initiate that. I don't know if that's your understanding, Trevor.
I agree, Mr. Chair. I think it's also in there in case we need it if something comes. To my knowledge, no one's initiated that yet, and need for it yet, but
Okay.
it's in there.
So it's something you contemplate as you're developing the audit plan for 2025, whether or not.
Right, yeah, no, that'll be something that we'll include in the assessment process.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on the follow-up items? Thanks, Lee.
Okay.
So then the second item, Lee, I guess if you want to stay there,
Okay.
it's the grants update.
Okay.
So just again, a couple of words
Okay.
from me is the Internal Audit Department did an audit of grants, I think primarily from a fiscal perspective, I guess is the way that I would interpret the report. Identified a bunch of grants that were probably, my terminology, old and expired, but still had not been appropriately cleaned up from an accounting perspective. And again, a cleanup process for grants could have a significant financial impact depending upon the outcome actually of the cleanup process. So audit report was identified, Lee and Lennon presented at a previous meeting their methodology or process to, and timeline to kind of go through and clean up the grants. I think there's been some great progress there, and I think you have a good report, so you want to
Yeah,
kind of
Lennon,
share.
I'll let you handle that one.
Good morning. Mike asked that we update the rest of the committee on correspondence that we had over the last couple of weeks and just where we were with the first round of grants, just to bring everybody up to speed, or just as a reminder. We started with looking at grants that had negative cash balances, and these were older grants from 2018 and that were ending in 2018 and prior. And that total was about $2.4 million. And since then, the goal has been to, number one, determine if the grants were still active or not, and number two, to close them out or make them inactive. Since then, and this is what we reported back to Mike, is that out of that amount, there were 2 grants of about $35,000 that are still active. They just have a long window for being allowed to still draw down from. There were, at that time, 8 grants that had about $100,000 that were closed. But just since then, we've closed out many more of those. There's really nothing that's active at this point. So they've been closed, and as we said to Mike, that unfortunately, because of the age of these grants, there really wasn't a lot of research that could be done because the data was from the old system, which is no longer active. We've got some access, but as far as paper reports, as far as the grants side of it and managing the agencies, the people who manage those grants are gone for the most part. And so it's just hard to go back and research. And so we've basically determined with them that the grants are inactive. There's no opportunity for drawdowns still from the funders to get these funds back. So basically the current status of these funds is, and this is what we told to Mike, is that the agencies that had these grants have basically absorbed the funds for the most part in with other funding that they have. Because not just one grant they have other operating funds. And so the question was, how much does the general fund have to take? Or what's the impact of the general fund? And it's not the whole $2.4 million. These agencies all have other funds, millions of dollars in some cases, one particular grant. There's just a couple of cases where there's a couple of grants that there's no funds that we can see right there that can offset it. And so we're continuing to research that and determine with the agency where those funds can come from, but not the general fund.
So for the most part, if there was a cash deficit in a grant fund, you resolve that cash deficit in the grant fund by going to the department and utilizing their non-general fund funds to resolve the cash deficit in their special revenue grant fund.
Correct.
For the most part.
Correct. We just recently created a report. We can see those balances of what they have in all but those 2 cases. There's other funds that they have right in the same, either in the accounting unit or in the fund, which is, there could be multiple accounting units that the agency has. They've got some cash to cover those shortages.
It's probably better than hitting the general fund, but still hitting the county funds. But it's better than, supposedly better than hitting the county's general fund. So are you done with the cleanup?
We're still going through the process. We're done pretty much with those old negative cash balances. Now we're having the agencies look at everything else. Positive cash balances all the way through, and then more current balances. And so recently we've had them go back and look at everything that they have up to the end of this year. We created a form, it's just, we call it a grant status update. And we're asking them to give us an update on what the current balance is if it's positive or negative, what are you going to do? If it's negative, is there still time to draw down funds from the funder? Or if it's positive, is the grant going to end? And if it has ended, if it's positive with an ending, positive balance, do we have to return the funds to the funder, or has the funder allowed us to use those excess funds on another grant? And so this form has information for them to fill out.
Those
No.
would be the ones where,
The majority are reimbursable.
but the ones
But-
that have like where the grant has ended and we have a positive cash balance, those were probably ones that we did the advance.
We have a
drawdowns.
question
Yeah, because usually
on,
most
yeah.
of the grants are reimbursable, so we really shouldn't have a grant that's closed with the positive balance because it's, in reality, it should basically be zero. Because you're talking about the ones
Yeah.
that should be closed, right?
Mhm.
Correct. So we had the expenditure occurred, and we submit the grantor, we submit something called a expense reimbursement to get reimbursed for all of our activity. Now, what had happened in the past is there may have been some charges that occurred after, and they didn't close it out properly. So there were expenses that occurred after the grant had officially closed. Paperwork to the grantor, our reporting. So we've drafted a grant policy that we've pretty much finalized. We've worked with the teams that handle grants, and we've come up with a policy and processes for grants, so everybody should be following. So we shouldn't get into these situations anymore. We're hopefully we'll be submitting it to the administrative review adoption, hopefully within the next month or so, and then we're going to roll out a training process to everyone who handles grants. In our policy, we have guidelines and forms for somebody so that we can better track, OBM can better track, like the end dates in the system. I think what was occurring and famous is that they would just, I think, internal audit grants that had an end date of 2099. So we're going to actually put real end dates in there. So if a grant is a 7-year grant, we'll end date it at 7 years, but we're going to do annual follow-up with the agencies. And then at the end of the 7 years, there will have to be action required by the agency to actually post something beyond that closeout period. So in theory, the grant manager is supposed to be monitoring this, and
The agency's grant manager.
correct, I'm sorry.
Agency.
The agency's grant managers, and the grant manager is anybody that, is a title that's anybody who monitors and manages that grant. Is not process. But does fiscal have a grants, probably a grants reviewer? We do not specifically have that, but under our new policy, we will be implementing some processes, even without a specific person that handles grants, that will fall under under the financial reporting manager, which falls under Lennon. That will fall under their purview to handle that. But hopefully, we do have a position listed where we have a grants, like a grants manager and a couple coordinator positions under there. So if we could work more closely with the people who oversee the grants in the individual departments. But until then, it'll probably be like a higher level review, not like a more detailed review, but it'll be a high enough level to prevent these type of issues, overspending, and or a position where we owe the funder some money and et cetera.
I will say on the internal audit side that we did receive a draft of the comprehensive grant policy. We did take time to review it. And I will say that it's very detailed, and if followed, it will ensure that the grant monitoring, the grant tracking, grant compliance is consistent, it's accurate. I think it's gonna be a good tool, a good policy, a good process for the departments too. It really, I mean, you talked about training too, which I think will be important, but as long as you're following that policy, everyone's gonna stay consistent, and going forward, we shouldn't have these issues, from what I.
Correct.
So just can you give me how many current individual active grants are there at the county? Just help me put this in perspective, if you know that number. A couple of hundred individual active grants throughout the entire county? Okay, any other questions on thank you very much. Any other questions on the grant?
Mr. Chairman, so if I'm an agency of the county, I applied for a grant. I've spent some of the money because most of them are on a reimbursed basis. So I'm tracking, meaning my agency is tracking the grant expenditures and what I should be requesting from the grantor. Who is overseeing the agency to make sure they're complying? Is it part of the policy? Is there someone overseeing all the agencies who are responsible for their own grants, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? Not that they're neglecting their duties, but there's changeover. That's a perfect time to lose track of a grant. It was when there's a new employee. So is there someone over all of the agencies making sure they're crossing their T's and dotting their I's when it comes to grant reimbursements?
So at a higher level, what we will be doing, because we don't have a grant resource person, but because we have to set up all the grants, we're actually tracking those grants to make sure that we're getting annual reports from these agencies. And the annual reports, we're just validating that the information that they're reporting out to the funder actually matches our system. But as far as monitoring, like at a more minute level, to make sure that, for example, that when we make a payment to like make sure that they're actually following the law and letter of the contracts.
No, that's actually not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the status of the grant.
Yes, so.
The status.
So we will be tracking that,
Who's,
yes.
who's,
We,
okay,
Will be
yeah,
doing that.
financial reporting will be doing that.
okay, thank you.
Yes.
We're gonna go back to the same report that started off in the first place, where the internal audit ran. We're gonna just continue to run that report and just monitor those balances, and then that will be able to prompt the agencies where we see.
Great,
And so
thank you.
what we have, just to piggyback off that, what we have done was to go in and clean up those end dates of the contracts so that we don't run into this situation again, because a lot of those contracts had an end date of 2099. So we went back and actually put the real dates in there. So that'll help us do a lot better at monitoring the end dates of the contracts. Thank you.
All righty, thank you very much. So back onto the agenda, so item
Hey,
7C.
Mr. Boudreaux?
Yeah.
Can I make a request? Mr. Andy Johnson is here from the IT department. Do you mind if we move to, I apologize for this, but item 8B, status of current engagements?
Sure.
I want to be respectful of his time too.
Sure.
And that's the only reason he's
He's
here.
an important guy,
Yeah.
so sure.
Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah,
if you're okay, if the committee's okay with that, I can
Yeah.
address that.
So I'll just, a couple quick, so we're talking about 8B, the first one, the ITGC risk assessment update? That's what
Right.
we're, that's, okay. So just a couple sentences from my perspective. So this has been an ongoing project. I think we had approved this contract, or this work a couple of years ago in the budget process, and then the work has been ongoing for at least maybe a year. Report was issued. It does show, I'll let the rest of you guys talk about what the report shows. Shows good things, so I'll let you brag about that a little bit. But I think there is still some follow-up work that the county has to contemplate in regards to the deliverable from the consultant. So with that.
I'll go ahead and give a presentation on the IT general controls risk assessment that was performed by Janus Associates. So in the fall of 2023, internal audit entered into a contract with Janus to conduct a review and risk assessment of the department IT's general controls. The goal was to assist the Department of Internal Audit in assessing the county's IT general controls and identifying risk mitigating controls for internal audit to test the IT control environment going forward. Evaluation of the controls was limited to identification of existing control and design of controls for mitigation. The effectiveness of existing controls was not explicitly in the scope of this engagement. It was just a risk assessment of the current controls in place and identifying gaps where they would recommend internal audit perform a compliance review or compliance audit on that area. So Janice performed a review on the IT general controls by asking over, I think it was over 150 questions, 170, that Mr. Johnson and his team, Jeremy Mio, had to answer over the last few months. The report is in your packet, and I also sent it to the audit committee yesterday in a separate communication email. And this report is at a high level due to the sensitivity of the details of the assessment, which again, I'll talk about briefly, but I did not want to share all the details in an email or in the public due to the sensitivity around the IT controls in place. Janice performed a review on the county's IT controls by specifically asking questions on software development, lifecycle controls. This is all listed in the report on the third paragraph down here. Workforce framework for cybersecurity, which follows the NIST guidelines. Controls from the IT infrastructure library, which is over areas of financial management such as budgeting. The final report contains results of the assessment at a high level again. Overall, Janice did conclude that the county's IT general controls are adequately designed, and the county has achieved a very mature IT environment with all critical elements of a robust ITGC framework that's firmly in place. So I will note that talking to Janice, I want to commend the work from Andy and his team, specifically Jeremy Mio and his team, because they did mention during our exit conference talking about this report that out of most of the government entities, especially this size, they were very impressed with the framework that the Cuyahoga County had in place. So that was good to hear. So I commend you and your team for that work. Specific recommendations, which are also listed in the report under assessment results, include IT to continue collaboration with the risk management team to expedite and develop implementation of an ERM process, an enterprise risk management process through the county's risk management team. This will strengthen the overall IT general controls and cybersecurity posture. IT to work with human resources and PRC to address talent challenges. I know they continue to work with them, but that's specific in the report to address challenges and staffing needs to meet operational demands and low pay. The recommendation for Department of Internal Audit is to take a proactive approach by first becoming familiar with the software development policies and procedures and perform a comprehensive review to help ensure that the county's SDLC is being managed effectively and that risks associated with software development are adequately mitigated. The main deliverable on this whole project includes a information technology general controls matrix that contains control objectives and identified gaps in controls for future testing on the county's framework. Based on these results, Janice does recommend future assessments focus on compliance with controls outlined in the county's ITGC framework and align it with NIST cybersecurity framework. So as I mentioned how mature the county's current IT environment is, they do have their own risk library and ITGC framework that can be used and tested to make sure that they are in compliance with those controls and the NIST cybersecurity framework. In Janice's report, as you might have saw at the end of the report, if I can get down there, they do talk about two different approaches. One would be to perform compliance testing in-house, which would require Department of Internal Audit to consider hiring an auditor with IT compliance experience. Currently, as you know, Department of Internal Audit does not have an IT auditor or the experience to audit specifically all the controls that is being recommended or all the ITGC framework that Janice identified. Number two would be outsourcing the compliance audit by contracting a specialized IT contractor specialized in compliance and security assessments. This would alleviate the burden on internal resources and may be less costly than hiring an auditor. Ultimately, the goal here is to evaluate conformance with the county's adopted security standards and continue the high level IT governance that has been achieved. I spoke to Mr. Johnson and Mr. Mio last week on the recommendations from this assessment and how our future audit testing can be effective for the county without duplicating efforts that other audits, other assessments they already go through. So I wanted to at least have those conversations with the IT team, with the administration. We've developed recurring meetings to discuss future testings and assessments on IT's control environment. I want to make sure that we're not putting a burden on the IT, especially cybersecurity team, as we test these controls, and don't want to duplicate any efforts. So I do not have a confident recommendation for the committee at this point of moving forward with hiring either an IT resource ourselves, an IT contractor, until I have more conversations with the IT team, because I don't want to get in a situation again where we're duplicating efforts, but I do feel like we have to have an ITGC framework, cybersecurity testing, and future audits. As you'll see here, as we go through our new standards, one of the requirements, it's called topical requirements, is to assess and test cybersecurity controls going forward. So if that is something already being tested on their end, it could be something that we gather the results and validate that the information or the support is there, and make a determination if we need to test further and determine if they're in compliance or not. So there's still, in my eyes, there's still conversations going over. I do want to bring up Mr. Johnson, if you have anything to say or comment on the report, if you have a chance to look through it. I know I just sent it to you last week, but or if there's any questions from the committee for me or Mr. Johnson.
So I have just one question. So are both internal audit, and maybe we'll hear your answer, both departments in agreement that something needs to be done? It's just a matter of figuring out what needs to be done and who needs to do it, and making sure that it's not already being done.
Summarize, yes, that's a good summary. Right now, yes.
So both departments, at least you.
At least our conversations last week.
But at least you think that some additional work needs to be done. It's just a matter of figuring out what needs to be done and who needs to do it.
Yeah, and I would like to, just talking about the IT, the matrix that we got, the ITGC matrix that we got. It's a great resource, great tool that I don't want to just pick out compliance and controls that it should be in place and start testing for them, because I know they have their own ITGC matrix. There could be mitigating controls there that we would be able to test. So that's why working with them to see, how is this going to look for us? Maybe it's already being assessed or tested by another outside resource or even the external auditors. So getting to a point where we're focusing on some of the gaps that they identified and high-risk areas that may not be tested, or reviewing some of the assessments tests that's already going on, and just asking for support to make sure it's accurate and complete. No. There's overlap from my understanding. What Janice was very helpful with is I know NIST 2.0 it's another new standard, not like we have enough new standards to go off of. They provided a matrix based on the NIST 2.0 on some controls that could be in place. The IT department has their own ITGC framework that shows compliance with NIST and ITIL, all these all these frameworks that we don't want to, burden the IT department by just asking for other controls when they have something in place. So we want to make sure we're at least on the same page of what we're asking for and making sure that these standards are in compliance here at the county. So there's still some work, at least internally, that we need to focus on. But this is a great resource for us to start, which I think was the point of this assessment.
So it sounds like the IT department is already doing some of the things that were recommended by Janice. So since they're already doing some of the things recommended by Janice, that's where there's the,
Right, yeah, they have, from my understanding, is IT already has these controls or mitigating controls in place. The Janice asked questions, they got some support. Some of the gaps they identified, a lot of it was IT answered the questions, they were satisfied with how they answered it. So they highlighted some of those gaps that we could go ask for support to make sure it's actually being done.
good morning.
My 2 cents worth here. So Andy, with Corey's assessment there, what this audit was at a high level. Probably where we need to focus. That's where was talking about, hey, so that obviously is a say, okay, hey, have we that we're doing with the Department of Defense or state or whatever, additional testing in certain areas, or maybe there's an area that I'm hopefully I'm clarifying a little bit.
One of the items we've talked about for a long time and is reinforced in this report is our need for qualified employee in the department that can do IT audit services. And this report says 1 or 2 people, actually. In reality, we've been budget constrained in doing that. We've been told in the past that the only way to overcome that problem is give up another position so that rather than expand the budget. Do you have any thoughts on how we can accomplish getting that resource?
I've thought about that through this whole process. One of the things that we need to figure out first is reliance on others' work. So that resource may not be, I mean, I still think it's, down the road, it's necessary to have here an internal audit. I mean, most internal audits do have some sort of IT resource, and we did in the past. We had someone that could do the work, and we could rely on that work. So first, which will help with the recurring meetings, is assessing, do we need that resource right now? There might be reliance on other work that is already auditors going through IT, that we could rely on their work and review it. But I think ultimately, even if an IT resource as far as a staff auditor goes, I think we'll need some sort of either contracting out or a staff auditor. I really believe contracting that out will be which way right now I would lean. That would be less costly. That would be someone that has that expertise to be able to validate, even if we're relying on others' work through IT, be able to validate that work for us. We can rely on their work to review, which again, I don't think would be as costly as, I think we had $100,000 in the budget for next year, 2 years from now, to have that resource. So it's something I'm still assessing. Unfortunately, I think there's definitely a need. I don't know if the need is there now without really assessing and analyzing everything that IT goes through as far as an audit and assessment basis. If that answered your question.
Let me can I ask a follow-up question to that? So as I understand it, we're gonna talk about the proposed 25 budget, but in what we're gonna be talking about today for the proposed 25 budget, you're suggesting, I forgot what the number is, but X dollars included in a 25 budget for an outsourced person to come in and do the work?
That,
That's
yes,
what's
that,
currently in the,
that's what I included as of, before we got this report and before I spoke to Mr. Johnson and Mr. Mio. I can talk about that a little bit more as we get into the budget, but right now, I know we have other operational needs too, to make sure we get in the budget for next year, but right now, I feel like more discussion with IT and just like what I said, on assessing the situation to see. I don't want to go to council or the executive and ask for, I think it was $100,000 when it might actually only cost $10,000 to do.
okay. If in fact there, you come to an agreement on what the dollar amount would be, and the work's done initially by somebody outside of the county, based upon what was provided by Janice, are we then done with this type of work, or do we have to continue to do this on an annual basis?
We have to continue to do this.
Okay, so that goes back to the having to potentially hire somebody internally after that. So it's not like it's a one-time, you do it and you're kind of done with it, or you do it every 5 years and you're done with it versus bringing a,
No, it's a continue, and I think that's where, knowing the cost to start, not sure what the cost will be to start, but going forward, it should be less and less if we're outsourcing that work, because it'll be basically a reoccurring audit every year to assess or test these controls and make sure that they're still in place on an annual basis, or even a quarterly, semi-annual basis, how often we want to test it. I did talk to 2 other local internal auditors here in the city of Cleveland, and they do have a separate ITGC testing that they do every year. They have a little bit more resources than we do here as far as testing for that, so it just takes time to develop that. And talking to the one director of internal audit, it was working with the IT team to get that framework and assessing that framework and asking for the support to make sure that they're following those controls.
Mike, when you said whether it's every year or every 5 years, my guess it probably will be on a 5-year rotation, but you're going to be looking at different things each year. And maybe 5-year, 8-year rotation, but something different each year, so you're covering everything and not necessarily inundating your department with everything all at once. Thank you.
okay. So the importance of the conversation that still has to take place is to potentially come back to the audit committee with a potential reduction in that, or increase potentially of that budget from, that we're gonna be talking about today.
Right, yeah.
So how does that discussion work then with the timing of trying to get a budget approved by the council for 25?
In my discussion with the OBM director, I believe beginning of November would be when we would have to make that decision if we want to request additional budget. I don't believe we need that approval from the audit committee, from my understanding from past audits, that the audit committee already approved the 2025 budget, so we wouldn't have to come back to the committee unless I'm misunderstanding that. But it would be a request to the executive or council if we feel like we need more budget for that work.
Okay. And we could talk logistically. I don't know if it's better for the county to have something that's actually been formally approved by the audit committee, or since we already approved a budget amount higher potentially than what you're going back for, whether or not we would need to do it. I just don't know how the county looks. Would it look better for the county if the audit committee was formally approving a budget, a revised budget, than the one that we already adopted? We could talk about that when we talk about the budget.
I would just say to do it before November, because we're gonna be doing an update in November, so I think you wanna be having that conversation now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So any other questions on the ITG risk assessment? I'm not an ITGC expert, but the report looks good for the county, for whatever, when I just read the report from Janice, so congratulations on whatever you.
Thank you very much for that. Again, this is a huge team effort. It's something that it goes with establishing the process, right? Establishing what our procedures are, and now it's just about the execution.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks for accommodating Mike B showing up when he did. So,
Well, I guess you're not that important, right? That's what I said.
But 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 I am assuming that it has to be somebody independent of IT doing the evaluation of whether or not IT is complying with their own process, right? I mean, it's,
There could be self-assessments too, that we just validate the accuracy.
all right. We'll let you
That
work more
still
through
can
that,
happen.
but, okay. All right. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we're back onto the old business, item C, the external audit update for the 2023 financial statements. So the whole purpose of having this on the agenda is to acknowledge in the minutes that the audit committee actually attended the post-audit meeting with Clark Schaefer. So again, I just, couple comments from my perspective. The presentation that Clark Schaefer does after their audits, I think, is great. Not only for purposes of summarizing the audit, but they do a pretty good job of summarizing the overall financial position of the county, which is always of a challenge, either good or bad. Just to explain it, not the financial position, just being able to explain the financial position of a large entity like the county, and obviously the great work of Lee and Mike and the team in getting the audit done timely and minimal comments and findings. So so just thank you for the work that you're doing there. So any other comments on the audit from anybody else? I think we complimented you enough at the post audit, so we're done complimenting you. All right. So item D, the recommendation for the revision to the county charter. So again, this has been a kind of a long-standing item for the committee. I think we all understand the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish by the audit committee in regards to the revision to the charter. We did make a formal request to the prosecutor's office to have them kind of take a look at the language that I think we've agreed upon, and to see whether or not it works from a legal perspective, or if there's any other thoughts or ideas from the prosecutor's office. So I guess I'll turn that over to Mark. The other thing I want to make sure that after we hear the update from Mark is what do we do next with this? I guess if we decide as a committee it's ready to go, then I guess the question is, where does it go? So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
There's some initial together by Monica to streamline it and try to so the first paragraph, it just starts out with part of the change, which advisory services.
Keep talking to the microphone.
So the auditing services, the audit, the Department of Internal Audit has the authority to perform under the direction of the audit committee, is really any entity that is supported by funds appropriated by council. It ties the authority and the ability to audit the various functions and activities of these bodies to council's appropriations, rather than are they an entity of county government, are they not an entity of county government, are they supported by taxpayer funds or not. It's an appropriation of council which draws the line on whether or not the committee and through the department has the authority to conduct audits. And that really is the rest. I mean, that's really the substantive change. The rest is more kind of housekeeping, cleaning. One other item, and Corey might have some additional perspective on this, excuse me, that it incorporates the language from the county executive order providing unrestricted access to personnel and records. Down in 11.44. And then in 5, the authority of the county to audit under agreements, which it seems like it's boilerplate language in the county contracts, that the committee has, or the department through the committee, has the right to conduct those audits on behalf of the county under those clauses in the contracts.
So let me make sure I understand that. So if that language is in the charter, but it's not in individual contracts, would this language then give the internal audit the authority to audit those contracts?
No.
No.
It makes it clear that the audit committee is the designee of the county to conduct those audits under those provisions of the agreements.
So, so that means if the language is there, it links with what the charter says, but it doesn't give carte blanche authority to audit all contracts unless the language is in the contract.
Right. The independent, the recipient of the funds through a contract needs to agree to open their books and records to an audit through an agreement. This just makes it clear that any right under an agreement it's a right of the committee to step into the shoes of the county under that provision of the contract. Anybody else, it's a non-exclusive right, so anyone else that the county may designate, the department or the officer that's administering the contract can conduct an audit. But it makes it clear that the audit committee has that right as well. At least attempts to make that clear.
Mark, countywide, does the law department review all contracts as to form to ensure that the language you looked at earlier is included in those contracts, the ability to audit?
Any contract to be effective needs to have the endorsement of the law director or an assistant under county code. Whether or not they are following on a policy decision to include that language, I believe so. The contracts I have seen include that language. I don't know if it's a policy of the law department to include it always, but the law department reviews for legal form and correctness, and that could be something that they voluntarily include in all contracts, and I believe it is. I mean, some might get through the cracks here and there, but I believe it's boilerplate language that the county has adopted.
Okay, so when the signature approved as to form, you're reviewing for that language and other typical standard language like limitations of liability, that sort of thing. That's happening in the law department.
I
for
might not
each
be
of
the
contracts.
best person. I can give you my understanding, but yes, that is my understanding of what happens when a contract goes through the process. The workflow includes law department's review, which would include the terms and conditions, which would include an audit, right to audit.
Thanks, Mark.
So that's one of the follow-up items, and I'm gonna reach out to the law director to make sure that's what they're looking for as well.
So if I look at this document, the color coding, what did you do versus the redlining? What was your?
I can answer.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I talked to Mark about this a few times, and we both kind of went through it and went over each of the changes. Everything you see in, I don't know what you're seeing on there, printed out forms, but everything you see here in pink or red is from Mark.
Okay.
And also, I believe, from the first red line version. Some of this is from that as well. Anything you see from green is from me. So I made changes to just be consistent with standards, especially the new standards. I felt like might as well make that change here on some of the green areas. The only major change I really made was I changed the Office of Internal Audit back to Department. I mean, I don't know the necessity to change it to Office other than I understand the appearance for to show independence from the departments of the county. But as I thought about it, looked into it more, that would require changes to more administrative work for us and the county administration and council, because in the county code, it says Department of Internal Audit in there. So if we change it in the actual county charter to Office, then there would be other changes to our other charters, to the county code, to our audit manual to our procedures, work papers, reports that I didn't, unless anyone else on the committee understood why it was changed to office, I felt like it wasn't necessary, so I just made the change back to department.
Was there, well, there is a change that you made. It's on section 11.03, that had referred to the Code of Ethics for certified internal auditors, which would be a very specific code of ethics, and seems to be changed to a more general notion of ethics and professionalism background.
Right, yeah, that's, so that's related to the new standards. It's not called Code of Ethics anymore for certified internal auditors. It's actually just called the Standards of Ethics and Professionalism for all internal auditors. So this will actually not just be for internal auditors, and then it says, or sorry, it's not for certified internal auditors, it's for all internal auditors that follow the standards. And it also says, or similar recognized standards established by IAA. So it's just,
So,
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. On the third page, I guess this isn't a question, this is more of a comment. On the third page, fourth line down that starts with, in green, Department of Internal Audit may conduct audits for fraud of any recipient of funds appropriated by council in conjunction with or without the Department of Inspector General. I can't imagine where we would conduct a fraud audit without the Inspector General. So it's really just a comment. I'm not saying we should change that. This obviously offers more flexibility, but I just can't imagine where internal audit would perform a fraud audit without involving the Inspector General.
Perhaps unless the department being examined was the Inspector General.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's that specific, but if there was any kind of conflict or some sort of issue involving the Department of the Inspector General, that the internal auditing department could step in and perform that function. Conjunction could mean, hey, please take it over too, so I'm not sure if, I don't think the intent was to have some sort of surprise investigation for fraud without communicating that fact with the Inspector General.
Sal, I read this as part of our internal audit standards, we're allowed to investigate fraud, and it really comes up in internal audit when we're doing an audit. So it might not be part of our scope at the time, or it is part of our scope. That part of our planning process is to assess for fraud too. So as we're doing our assessment during our planning of the engagement, there might be testing that we need to do to review if there was fraud, suspected fraud. So we have procedures in place that we have to follow with the standards, auditing standards, to make sure we're at least assessing it and maybe even testing it. But then it says with coordination or in coordination with Department of Inspector General, to me means that if we were to make a referral to Inspector General, and if they have questions or want to see any of our support, we'd be working with them. So that's kind of how I view it, going hand in hand.
11.044, the unrestricted access to all records, that's the same, that's a similar language that what the IG has in their charter? Is that where this language came from?
That actually, from my understanding, that came from our internal charter. They do have similar language. I don't think it's exactly the same.
You might want to mirror the same language. They have, in the county charter, there's Inspector General language for access to county information. So we might want to just stay consistent.
And then the same sentences that Sal was pointing out, I think you have a typo in there. I couldn't get it to, may conduct audits for fraud of the recipient of funds. Any of the recipient of any, or just get rid of the, I don't know what you want to do there. Or am I just not reading the sentence right? Huh? Okay. Okay, so then I'm assuming that the audit committee should formally approve this? Well, let me just make some assumptions, then we could talk about it. So I'm assuming that the audit committee at some point in time should formally approve this, Mark or Corey? And then if that's the first step, I don't know if that's the first, and then what happens? What do we do then?
Aren't we back to the issue of the charter is not up for review? I think it was 2027, is that, my memory correct on that?
Yeah, but
So
there's-
are we just going to pass it now and put it on the shelf for 3 years? Is that the plan?
I don't know, I guess, I don't know, I mean, as a charter review.
Then the only thing that would concern me about that would be what else is gonna come up over that 3-year period. I believe we've been advised to try to pursue this independent of the normal charter review process, would not be looked on with favor elsewhere in the building.
I was gonna suggest that this not be passed and remain in draft form, and annually as part of our charter, internal charter here for the audit committee is review of the county charters. So annually going forward, which occurs in the quarter 1 or 2, that this would be brought up and just reviewed quickly to make sure there's no changes being recommended, and move on for the next year until it can go in front of council or the voters.
So as I see it, Mike, it would be a recommendation to the county council to bring it to the charter review committee, and then at some point they would review and determine what goes back to county council for approval. I think Trevor put together a nice schedule for us a while back of how that would work, but I'm not in favor of doing a special election for this at all. Wouldn't want the county to go through that expense. I guess a follow-up to that is to the county itself. Do we still have an executive order from the county executive to be able to go into departments that may be restricted at this point with the current language?
My understanding, we do. I don't know if it's still,
The executive order is just access to the work papers, not necessarily the ability to audit.
it's just the free and unrestricted access to records data.
Right. Okay,
Just one point of clarification of what Sal said. The audit committee would actually, probably through Corey would present to the Charter Review Commission the recommended changes. The Charter Review Commission will invite all county departments, agencies, elected officials to come in and present any proposed changes that they would like to see to the charter. And then the Charter Review Commission would consider all those proposed changes and then make a recommendation, list of recommendations to the council for council's consideration.
and that won't happen until, when will that happen?
The Charter Review Commission will reconvene in 2027. The county executive will make appointments to the Charter Review Commission, council confirms, and then I think that has to be done by July 1st, I believe. I have to go confirm that date in the charter, but sometime in 2027, they'll meet for the first time.
I think we did this, the committee and the internal audit went through the charter review process back in 2017. Does that make sense? Yeah, 17, so that was.
And the I mean, I agree with Corey about holding off on doing anything right now. One, we got, I think, some language just to clean up, so I would wait till we have final language. Nothing will happen next year. It's a municipal election year. I would recommend to the council that they wouldn't put anything on the ballot, because then we have to take on a lot of that cost that normally are hold for municipalities. 2026 could be an option, but again, I don't know if you're gonna get that person that wants to sponsor that, carry the start to finish on a charter amendment, knowing that we're gonna have a charter review commission the following year.
Okay, so So everybody's okay holding off on formally approving it? Has been, okay. Just that it's done, I mean, I do think, well, I don't know how it works. I would assume that, it might be helpful to have other folks other than Corey kind of championing this on behalf of the audit committee, like maybe some of the members of the county council. I just don't know. I just don't know how that process works here at the county, but, so if that was the case and there were a couple of county council persons that were willing to really sit and understand why we're proposing the change, it might help it get through the county review commission process faster. And so if we had formally approved the language, then it gives Corey something to actually sit with some county council persons to have those conversations
Well,
way prior to the charter review.
yeah, I mean,
commission.
I completely agree that the endorsement of the committee is important. I'm just having trouble seeing my way through what the political process is between now and 2027, the fact that there can be, first of all, new issues that might enter into what we would ultimately want to present. County council may have turnover of members and leadership in that period of time. I think this great work has been done to get us to this point. We need to keep it at the forefront, but I think the time to actually formally adopt it would be closer to the time the review process begins.
Okay. All right, so we will do that. We'll keep this as an agenda item. I guess I would like to know at our next meeting that everybody on the audit committee, even though we're not formally approving it, I guess, that everybody's okay with it. So I would like to just know, we've been spending a lot of time with it, and I don't, I'm just encouraging everybody to read it one more time after today's conversation, and then we'll just talk about it at the next meeting.
Mr. Chair, the one recommended change, as I suggested, I would just see if we can mirror the restricted access. And I don't know if it'll work or not, but I'd like, if we're gonna have similar language, I'd rather it be the same instead of asking the prosecutor's office 5 years from now, trying to.
We actually did, Josh pulled it up and it is similar, but we'll go back and look to see if any language changes. It looks like the only thing that I added was data and information there in green. That's in line with our standards, but we'll see if we can mirror it. Okay.
Everybody good on that topic? So thank you for your input in that. So items E and F, and possibly G, we can maybe combine these. So there are new standards that the Internal Audit Department and I think ultimately the Audit Committee have to comply with, which Corey's gonna go through. He has a presentation here. Those new standards do impact the Audit Committee charter and the Internal Audit Charter. And so there are suggested changes to both of those charters that primarily are due to the implementation of the new standards. I made Corey painstakingly walk me through all of those changes to make sure that I was comfortable with everything that was being proposed, primarily for understanding the potential implication on the Audit Committee and the work that we're doing. So clearly, they have to deal with it, and clearly, we have to deal with it, but I wanted to make sure that I understood what the changes were and how we potentially would have to incorporate that into the business of the Audit Committee. So he has nicely walked me through all of those. So with that, I guess I'm gonna turn it over to Corey and Josh and whoever's gonna. So these are just ones that we approve, so these don't go to the.
These are, I call these internal charters. These are the ones just through the audit committee.
I was just gonna, so here's my notes, if before you start, Corey.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Can we change these to audit committee guidelines and internal audit department guidelines as opposed to charters?
We,
Unless there's some
I'll
county
look at
overall
that.
departmental requirement to call them charters.
as long as, I can look into that, because I know with the standards, they reference an internal audit charter. So every internal audit following the standard should have an internal audit charter. which is, actually both of them together are considered the internal audit charter according to standards, but I can look to see if we can just call it something else and then refer to it as a charter in the,
Yeah, because in both of them, there's reference that they are guidelines. So maybe reverse it, call them guidelines, and inside they serve as the charter of the, and as far as the internal audit one, since we're changing the department or proposing a change in the county charter, maybe we can call it the internal audit department guidelines, just to.
okay, I'll look in that, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if the committee's okay, I'd like to address E and F, section E and F here. Item G, 7G, the annual review of internal audit policy. I don't have anything in front of the committee that would be specific to the audit manual, so I'm just recommending to place that on the next agenda for old business to consider then. So we won't go into item G today. Okay, so for the audit committee charter and internal audit charter, which are the two internal charters just approved by the audit committee, I will be presenting revisions to both of these charters here at this meeting, and then I'll respectfully request approval of the revised charters at the fourth quarter meeting, so it gives the audit committee time to review. I did send, about 2 weeks ago, I did send these revisions to the audit committee as well, just to give you more time to review these changes. And majority of these changes are due to the new standards. Oh, sorry, let me pull up the audit committee first. I do have a presentation. I know Mike referenced going over the new standards. I do have a presentation at a later item, so I won't be going over all the new standards here. I'm just going over some of the policy changes for the audit committee charter and the internal audit charter, and these amendments. So beginning on page 1, I know you'll see a lot of comments, a lot of changes here. As Mr. Bruiser all said, I went through and any changes that I made, I referenced why the change is being made. Most of them have to do with new standards and just language from the standards. And then I also put a comment under those of how we're complying with, how the audit committee is complying with that standard or with this new language right now, or how the audit committee will comply with the language going forward. Ultimately, I see it as the Department of Internal Audit, or my job, to make sure the audit committee is following these standards, the audit committee charter, and the internal audit charter as well. So on page 1, I did add, sorry.
What document are you in right now? Because
This is the audit committee charter, sorry. This is A-7.
you're not on the first page of the audit committee charter?
I apologize.
Oh,
There you
okay.
go.
All right, okay.
So on page 1, you'll see a lot of redlined here. Most of this language wasn't taken out, or I think all of it wasn't taken out. It's just moved to different sections, more for clarity and consistency. So a purpose, authority, and committee oversight section was added. The purpose section was added because this is mostly language in the charter, and it does include new language from the standards. So again, I put what standard we're following with the language change and how the committee is already in compliance with that standard. The new authority and committee oversight sections, which begin at the bottom, or I'm sorry, begin at page 2. Those are mostly also from the new standards, but it does point out the authority being the county charter. So with the new standards, they want you to make sure that you're putting in where the authority of the audit committee comes from, and it comes from the county charter. On page 4, under the composition of the committee, this is a new language change as well. I know this has been a topic of discussion, I think even since the internal audit department started. There were modifications made to the director's reporting relationship to the committee. This is on page 3, top of page 3. Reporting to the committee functionally is the current practice and aligned with the standards. However, the chairperson will be the point of contact for the director for questions and concerns outside the meetings, which is also current practice. It just wasn't clear in the actual audit committee charter. In our internal audit charter, it does say the director shall report to the committee. And here it said the director of internal audit shall functionally report to the chairperson. So with the language change here, it's current practice, in my opinion, that internal audit functionally reports to the committee, but the chairperson will be a point of contact for any questions or concern outside of the committee meetings at the director's discretion. And beginning on page 5, which relate to duties and responsibility of the committee, number 11. I did make language changes here, but this was just adding language from the standards. The committee does currently review all charters and discusses changes with management as we have management on the committee. So that's just aligning with the standards to make sure we're in compliance with that. So no changes there, at least for the audit committee's responsibilities. Number 13 is the same, just referencing the charter. More for consistency, we're just referencing the actual county charter on which standards we follow, because the standards are in the charter of which ones we follow. So that's all that's doing. So if we make changes to the charter, we'd have to make changes to this charter or policy and guideline and internal charter or internal audit charter as well. So that's all that's doing. Number 15, which is the final page, or page 6. This is actually a new section added for responsibility, which again is something that the committee currently does. So I added the Quality Assurance and Improvement Program. We currently have a program annually that is reviewed by the committee. I think the first one done, Josh, was 2022, correct? The internal assessment of standards and current audit practices. So this is currently being done. It's just formally being put in as a responsibility under the audit committee, and this is a new standard, 8.1, that is specifically requested to be a part of the charter. So those are the changes I wanted to point out. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but again, I'm not asking for approval at this meeting, but I just wanted to point out some of the changes that the committee should be aware of.
Corey, on page 2, near the top of the page, there's a listing of responsibilities. Second to last is the word monitoring, which everything above and below, it seems to be pretty specific. I'm just struggling a little bit with what we're monitoring, what we're really getting after there. It seems very non-specific.
Yes, and I hate to say this answer to start, but this was part of the charter already. I just moved it.
Yeah.
But I would say monitoring would be, if anything were to come up, that we maybe not be auditing through like a board of control meeting or council meeting, or any practice that we're aware of that we feel like we need to ask questions about or review. I think that would be the monitoring part of the county's governance responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a particular problem with that concept. I think others who may review this might consider it to be a word that where mission creep could come in. So just, if it's just me, I'm happy to not pursue that issue any further.
No, I think this, and Josh, I appreciate your opinion too, but we have the management requests as part of our annual budget as well. Our management requests or responses, so I feel like that, as part of our annual budget, that would fall into place for monitoring.
So
Corey, did you, so we were presented previously with proposed changes to the audit committee charter. So how does that compare with what's here, and did you do an evaluation of that, and what was your?
Yeah, so I looked at what was previously provided. That actually came from a model internal audit charter, or audit committee charter from 2014, 15. I don't know if you remember, Josh, what year that was, but that came from a model internal audit charter, especially with the new standards, which I'll go into. It's very specific on for public sector internal audit functions that if we have to deviate from a standard, that we can, just as long as we document it, because understanding that each political, or at least each political subdivision or entity is different, organized and structured different, so I wouldn't recommend using a blanket charter template. Plus it wasn't redlined to the actual charter. So I tried to do a comparison of that, but it ultimately, some of the language in here did come from that, if it pertained to the current structure of our audit committee and our internal audit function, but I wanted to show, redline versions of what changes were made. You'll see, like this one right here on page 2. There's a comment here that it came from the model charter with new standards. So that language is still in the model charter with the new standards. So that one that you were presented with, I think it was older, and not all of it pertained to the structure here. And
So just to be clear, in your judgment, there's nothing that's in the model charter that is not covered down on here? I mean, we were, by the prior director, advised, I guess would be the right word, about her feeling of the importance of that professional organizations document and our adherence to it. So in your judgment, you could line up what's here against there, and we're good?
right, yeah, there was some, in the original one presented to the committee, for example, there was one recommendation to have a term limit on resident audit committee members. That was I didn't see that as a requirement in the standards. Plus, again, we don't have that in our county charter. That's not a requirement in our county charter, so I don't know why we would add it into the audit committee charter, unless the audit committee wants that in there. I know how difficult it is to find resident members too. So I took that out, unless the committee wants to add it back in there, but that's just one example that.
Yeah, I particularly have no desire to add that specific one back in, but I think if we're gonna pass this at the next meeting, perhaps you could just go through and let us know any place where we might be at variance or interpretive, just so we know and we don't get caught in some future date that we didn't follow professional standards.
Okay. Yeah, I can go through the sections that don't have a standard on here and just note why, like this area right here.
Well, just to be clear, I'm mostly concerned that there isn't something in the model that is not covered down on in here, and unless we understand the reason why.
Okay.
So term limits, your explanation was perfect, and I would agree with it. I just would rather not have to be responsible for drawing those lines myself. If you could just present to us where the areas of judgment were.
Okay. I think I understand. You want me to go through the model that was presented to the committee and just document where?
Not necessarily the draft of the last director, but going from the model to your recommendation, where there might be any omissions from the model, just so we can understand why.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that for next meeting.
Okay. So you're not, Corey, you're not asking for approval at this meeting, you're asking for approval at the next meeting with this?
Right, yes.
Okay. So,
Mr. Chair, real quick, I just wanted to thank Corey for the red line version. That was helpful to.
yeah.
be able to tell what was really changing. It was just difficult
Yeah.
without that, so I appreciate that.
And adding the comments, because I think it made it easier for us to understand why it was necessary for the comments and what potential impact it may or may not have on the audit committee. So I think both of that was very, very helpful. All right, so you want to get through the internal audit chart, and we're going to have to figure out we're behind schedule again, Corey. So I think I want to cut the meeting off no later than 20 till 12.
Okay.
So however we're going to figure out the rest of the agenda, we can work on that together.
So the internal audit charter, I think just for the sake of time, I'll just go through the significant changes that were made other than talking about compliance with standards. There was a lot. How I view these two charters is the audit committee charter is just for the audit committee to make sure the audit committee is in compliance. The internal audit charter should be just for the internal audit function. So this is really where us as a department need to make sure that we're in compliance with the internal audit charter. I'm gonna just skip to sorry, there's no page numbers on here. Apologize.
Can I just quickly weigh in on favor of the issue Sal raised before? If we could find some way in the naming of these, we have three things we're calling charters here, and it's, you know, for those of us that address this only periodically, it's a little confusing. So,
Right.
However you need to do that.
I agree. It took me 7 years to figure out that. Yeah, guidelines or policy, I think could be another. So yeah, I will definitely make a recommendation on that. Okay, so I'm gonna go to page under organization. So I think this is page 2. Yeah. Starting on page 2, it's titled organization on to page 3. This is one of the changes that, similar to the audit committee charter on the director reporting functionally or administratively to someone. I went through the new standards and made some language changes to align with those standards for the director reporting administratively to a member of management to support day-to-day activities. This could be the fiscal officer. I did speak to Mr. Chambers about this. He was okay serving in this role, but with this language saying just management, it would be up to him because really ultimately, really the support day-to-day would be timesheet approval. So with this language, I think it would be up to him or management and how that approval should work. Could go with him, could stay with the current practice, which the current practice is similar to how the IG and the PRC director's timesheet approvals go. So I made the change to be consistent with standards, but I did want to have audit committee's input on this section because currently that is, it says administratively to the county fiscal officer.
Just, can I get some clarity on this? So you, under here, do we think that this is the best scenario for the county fiscal officer to be approving your time when you're auditing him?
I never understood it either, but that is what the standards allow.
That is not my preference. I'd rather Trevor do it on the council side than, you're welcome.
It's more with the sorry to interrupt.
Because they're not getting audited, so.
It's more with the support of the day-to-day activities. So I know Mr. Chambers has to approve, I guess that raises the question, who approves our travel? I know our travel expenses or reimbursements go through. So that would raise the question on if everything goes through someone else, should that approval also go through that person?
I'm just putting on the record, I object to this.
So the language gives a flexibility for either Trevor or Mike to ultimately do it in the future. So it's just something that the county has to.
I wouldn't say Trevor being part of council, the legislative body. This is just management.
But the member, you don't consider him a member of management?
not for this sake.
So how about members of the audit committee and/or members of management?
I mean, that could work. The standards are, I mean, it's flexible. It just says members of management to support day-to-day activities, which could be the COO, CEO, CFO. Obviously, it's not for government the way it's worded, but in that case, it would be the executive, fiscal officer, or chief of staff.
How do we want to resolve this language here?
I'm a little confused. I actually find myself persuaded by Katie that the separation might be good. Is there a problem with this being authorized through the council side as opposed to the administration side? What's the counter to Katie's position?
I would say the counter would be the current practice. Timesheet, just like the other independent agencies, goes through HR.
Well, if we were starting from scratch, we started today, and we said, should it be approved through the council side or the administration side? We're getting past practice. What are the pros and cons?
How the charter was set up, or at least this charter was set up, was to go through the fiscal officer. That was back in the day, though, when the fiscal officer was, I don't know if you probably remember that, Trevor. The fiscal officer was the chairman of the committee. So I think that would be out of the question. I don't like it either. I agree with Katie. I don't like that I would be reporting to someone who, any audit we really do, would go back to the fiscal office as far as it relates to finances and budget. I just don't know where
Who approves your timesheet right now?
it just goes through the HR process, and
Yeah.
like Pat Smock would be the one approving it.
So Pat, you're right, Pat Smock is approving it, but it's to form. There's no follow-up.
Right. Yeah, he's just submitting, certifying the payroll, really. That's all he's doing there.
Put it in.
No, there's not a challenge to that. It's
With that, I mean, if Katie's got a good point, so if we need to change this.
So, how do you want to tweak the language to members of the audit committee and/or?
to a member of the audit committee or management. Recommend then. Or you could just put a member of the audit committee as management is, our audit committee is part of management too, so that could be a possibility if that ever changes.
Just to think about something between now and when we get this done. So functionally and administratively. Administratively, I think our concern is payroll, HR-related stuff, timekeeping,
Right.
Travel, making sure there's compliance with travel policy. So I don't know if that's evident by functional administrative. And maybe it's just figuring out who can handle those few items on behalf of the audit committee, since we're not employees of the county and know the specific policies.
The only other person in this situation is the Inspector General, correct?
Personnel Review Commission,
PRC.
I believe Rebecca's the same way.
I kind of approve the travel, but I don't really get involved with her hours. I think that just goes right to HR.
Yeah, they're handled the same way my position is now,
Yeah.
just through Pat, just certifying.
Yeah. Okay, just a note.
I mean, I'll just say I know, at least from my time here prior, that's the way it's always been handled, is through that process, the HR certifying the payroll.
Want to keep going?
I mean, so Corey, does the language matter? If that's how we do it, Mike's not approving your timesheet.
Yeah, it doesn't, it's not specific to, when it says a member of management to support day-to-day activities, it doesn't say for timesheet approval. So if reporting administratively to management, if it's Trevor or Mike or management or an audit committee, then I see it as, if you believe that the payroll should stay the same, that it just goes to HR. Pat Smock certifies it. That, to me, is still administratively, it's still under that function. So I don't know, I'm necessarily not saying the current practice needs to change. I think it just needs to be clear administratively for day-to-day activities, who would I report to? Not saying we have to change the actual payroll timesheet approval process.
When it goes through the payroll process you just talked about, Corey, is someone evaluating that hours are within core hours, that all hours are accounted for, meaning either work, sick, vacation, and so on? Is that review being done through that payroll process you just described, or is that supposed to be done by someone else?
Right now, it's being, in my eyes, it's being done when I send the timesheet to the committee every Friday. That's where that review process would have to be done at this point. But you can change this to an audit committee member, and it's not saying the audit committee member has to approve my timesheet. You can give access to the audit committee member to my payroll in case they need to go look at it, but not necessarily have to approve it every single week. So that could be a process as well that would hopefully would work for the audit committee. If that member, if it's Trevor, if it's Mike, still has access to it, they're just not responsible, or they don't have to approve it. It still goes through the HR process. But to answer your question, there's not anyone specific other than, to me, sending the email to the audit committee every Friday that's going through my timesheet. Now, if I put in 30 hours and it goes to Pat, he's gonna send me an email and say, hey, where's your other 10 hours or time off? So he's already emailed me a few questions on my first couple timesheets, just asking me. So he's can't submit it or certify it until I have the 40 hours on there. So that's being caught there.
All right. So why don't you have some more conversations on this topic between now and the next meeting, after you've talked to folks and proposed something, and we'll talk about it at the next meeting.
Okay.
On this particular bullet point, this particular change.
Okay, the last item I wanted to go through on page 10. This would be under responsibilities of the director and staff. Page 10, no, it's not labeled. Right above reporting requirements. So I do want to point out the change to the external assessment, change to that language. A revision was made to the external peer review, mainly due to the current circumstances which could occur in the future. Currently, this charter requires internal audit to receive an external peer review every 3 years. IAA standards, which we follow, is every 5 years. I did add language. I kept the every 3 years in there. I still think that that's important to keep in. But I did add language that allows the committee to approve an extension beyond 3 years, but not to exceed the 5 years, as the standards are currently 5 years, as long as it's reasonable, which could be for budgeting or staffing restrictions. And more in this case is implementation of new standards, staffing restrictions, and we don't have the budget this year to go forward with that. The 3-year time period from the last assessment would be actually October of this year. So obviously, we won't even meet the 3 years right now. So extending it out 2 years will allow us time to fully comply with the new standards and to be reviewed on those standards and to give us time to request the budget for those new standards as well. What I would recommend is, if this is approved in December, is that I would come back to the audit committee and ask for a motion to extend that 3-year requirement to up to 5 years, 2026. So we have the budget, we have the staffing, and we can comply with the new standards.
I thought I heard you say the 3 years expires in October. Should we grant that extension now so that we
Can't, because of
we
the
can't? Okay.
this. So technically we'll be out of compliance for 2 months. But we're out of compliance from our own charter. We're not out of compliance from the standards. So if an external review is done, they're going to be okay with that, because it's every 5 years according to the standards.
So Corey, this is our charter, so we could make a motion to amend it right now, just to make that amendment so that we're in compliance.
You could, yes. Yeah, this is your charter. This is what the audit committee approves.
Which you probably should do, right? I mean, from what I'm hearing, we should pass a motion today to at least amend the,
If we know we're going to be out of compliance and we're comfortable with doing the extension, I'd rather keep it clean than ever be subject to criticism that we didn't comply with our own charter. Okay.
I consider a better government, just a better practice to do it more frequently. I think I was the one I was advocating for discussing it, so I just thought it was a better practice.
And just in the past, we followed Yellow Book, government auditing standards, and the internal audited standards. And when you follow both of them, you have to follow the most restrictive standard, which would be the 3 years. So when we started the internal audit department, it was every 3 years. So it was just, with the audit committee charter, we just continued that practice for the 3 years. Now the cases, with some of the restrictions that we have in place right now, we still have that flexibility to go up to 5 years, but we should put it in the charter to comply with that.
So we need a motion to modify the current internal audit charter to grant the period from to modify the peer review process from what's currently in there for 3 years to add language to up to 5 years.
I'll make that motion if somebody will wordsmith it so that
So the current language is just
Correct.
simply undergo a peer review at least every 3 years by independent external reviewers. That's it. That's the current language.
Right.
So that's the language we're going to be amending, right? So undergo a peer review every 3 years by an independent external reviewers. The committee, next sentence would be, committee may approve deferring the external assessment beyond 3 years from the most recent external assessment, but not more than 5 years. Global Standard 8.4.
So it seems to me we need 2 motions. One, to amend the document with that language, and then a second amendment, or second motion to actually extend the period.
During the peer review from 3 years to up to 5 years.
Keith, if you made that first motion, I'll second it.
Are we good with the language? Does that language work for everybody?
It's just that bullet point.
Okay. So all in favor of approving do we have a second for that? You seconded it.
I did.
Okay, so all in favor of approving the motion as recommended by Mr. Libin, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. All right, Corey, you want to keep going?
Yeah, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to extend the 3 years independent external review of, or, I'm sorry, I'd like to make a motion to extend the peer review from 3 years to 5 years.
In this particular circumstance?
Correct.
Okay. Second, all right. All in favor of approving the motion as recommended by Sal, say aye.
Aye.
Great, okay.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on. Again, I'm gonna skip over item 7G, review of internal audit policy, but request that that be kept on an old business item for next meeting. And down to other business, 8A, the semi-annual issue tracker report is included in your attachments as A-8.
Corey, we have 15 minutes, so do you want to decide what you want to cover in that 15 minutes?
If the committee's okay, I'd like to skip over the issue tracker. If anyone, unless anyone has any questions, Josh, I don't think there's anything significant you want to go over, correct? Or I do want to thank the administration, especially Katie Gallagher, for your efforts to resolve these issues in a timely manner. I know you've been emailing and communicating with a lot of your departments to get some of these issues addressed, so I thank you for that.
Yeah, so let's just defer this one to the next meeting. We'll defer the issue tracker and try to
Yeah,
squeeze
we
it out of the next meeting, okay?
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'd like to move on to the BVA, 2024 BVA for the current audit plan. Item 8, part of our item 8B and then 8C as well. So I'm gonna have Josh walk through the current BVA for the 2024 audit plan, just note some of the changes that we made. That is 8-A.B.B.2 attachment. So if you wanna go ahead, Josh.
All right, so this is basically what you've seen before as a status of current engagements. What you'll see is the 2024 audit plan. The format of this has changed slightly. So some of it's still the same, where you see, the 3 different sections: carryover audits, 2024 planned, and then consulting. The green section here where it says engagement, you're also used to seeing that. That's basically the budgeted hours for the engagement compared to the actual hours spent on the engagement. Now, there's an additional section here called 2024-2025 budgeted/scheduled. So this is basically showing the hours that we're allocating to each individual year because of carryover efforts. So as an example, the first one, hotel motel, although the engagement before is what you would see, it's 524 hours actually spent. Well, we only actually used 15 of those in 2024. The rest was prior to in 2023. So this just kind of distinguishes how much for the entire engagement versus how much of the current actual year that we're focusing on. So by all means, if you have any questions about that specifically as we go through, just let me know. Hotel motel, that was released in early January. It's released and closed. IT general controls review, Corey went over that earlier. The bank reconciliation process, that one's released and closed and was discussed earlier as well. Development loan portfolio management, that one is released and closed. The development community and housing development, that one is still going on, and we're a little behind schedule from what we originally anticipated. We ran into some unexpected findings, excuse me, which basically had us expand our scope a little bit just to ensure that we have appropriate coverage over mitigation of fraud, risk, and abuse. So that one we expect the report to you in October. Okay. Next section is the 2024 audit plan, or planned audits. It still keeps that same format that we had before, where even deferred engagements based on resources versus risk on there. So ethics, that was deferred. Jail operations was deferred. Microfilm is in reporting. We are a little behind schedule on that just because of prior engagements running over. However, we do expect the report to be to you in October as well. The criminal justice information systems, that one we started planning. So the insurance conference will be held, I believe, next week. Animal shelter, we're still just firing that one up, so planning has just started. And then the other engagements were either deferred or not started. Okay, the issue tracker, that's continuous. Risk assessment, we are actually, since this report was developed, we're actually in field work. Basically at this point, we're starting to get responses back on the questionnaires. QAIP, that's the implementing the new standards as well as doing our internal review of standards. So project excellence and the consulting, excuse me, that basically entailed the teammate conversion, the newer version of the software, as well as the DIA outreach, which Corey will be going over later. So at the bottom of this is a revised 2024 audit plan proposal, which Corey is going to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. On page 2 at the bottom of the BBA, what we're doing here is we're showing remaining hours for the rest of the year based on our current resources. So as you can see, 2,040 hours remain for the rest of the year, with priorities including a focus on follow-ups, new standards, and our DIA outreach and awareness plan. We'll now have the hours to start the contract compliance for the sheriff's office and the collection enforcement support for the clerk of courts, which is currently on the audit plan. So what we're requesting to do is to audit committee to approve deferring those audit plans until 2025. We do believe we can complete 4 more audits this year that's listed on the audit plan by the end of the year. So that's why when you're looking at the BVA, you don't see 2025 budgeted hours other than the ones we're requesting to defer. So we do plan to complete all other audits that are planned for this year other than the 2 we're requesting to defer in 2024. In addition, I do want to point out an oversight on the approved 2024 audit plan in March of this year. This is mainly related to the scope of the animal shelter, which I'll bring up real quick here. In December 2023, the scope of the animal shelter included to evaluate compliance with federal, state, and local laws and regulations related to general and veterinarian operations. And we just found this out this week in review of the draft and approved audit plan. With the approved audit plan in March of 2024, the scope at the end changed to evaluate compliance with any grants awarded. So we're requesting, with approval of the amendment to our audit plan for the rest of the year, is that the committee amend the audit plan to the original scope of the animal shelter and to the audit plan presented in December 2023, because there's little to no grants at the animal shelter per our review of the financials and recent risk assessments. So in summary, we are requesting deferral of the 2 audit engagements as stated, and to remove the grant compliance piece of the scope of the animal shelter to include compliance to laws and regulations related to general and veterinarian operations.
Okay, so you're proposing that change to make that scope more pertinent to the department?
Right.
Are you adjusting the hours because of that change?
No.
Okay. So the 2 audits that you're asking the audit committee to defer to next year, they come out to, I believe, a little like 1,150 hours. So where were those hours? How do you explain having to move those 1,150 hours over to 2025? Staff vacancy would be one explanation, but what would be the other?
Yeah. A lot of it comes down to the remaining, our hours allocated for the year. But also, we had increased hours in housing community development, which is stated on the BVA. We had increased hours on the issue tracker as we have gotten more follow-up coming back to the county internal audit. So we want to increase hours, especially on the P1 findings. We don't want to defer review of those. We want to get those addressed as soon as possible. And also DIA 2024 goals, increasing hours there. I know there was hours in the budget for that reason, but in talking to Josh and staff, the migration issues with Teammate Plus back in the spring took most, if not all, those hours away. So we're requesting, based on the plan that we have presented, or it will be in front of the audit committee today, we want to increase those hours.
I hope this question is taken in the spirit it's intended, which is to try to understand why budgeted hours, previously budgeted hours are for those audits are not going to be able to be accounted for in the final few months. It seems to me some of the reason would be issues around the transitioning out of the previous director and onboarding of a new director, that would create some challenges to hours at the audit task. Is that a fair assumption?
That is a fair assumption as it relates to the new standards, the amount of work that we have to do in a short period of time, especially with the new director coming on board, but also 4.5 months worth of vacancy in our staff auditor. Right there is the 1,100 hours is the vacancy in that.
That's something I can wrap my brain around pretty easily.
Yeah. That
Okay,
one was
thank you.
easy one.
I have a quick question. I'm kind of just looking at the budgeted hours and the actual hours, and for most of the audits, for many of the audits, we went over budget. So the question is, based on your estimate of the remaining hours, do you feel like you'll be in line with the budget, or are we baking enough time
Yes.
for that to make sure that we complete what we're suggesting we're gonna complete?
Yes, I'm confident. That's why this last schedule here, the last table, and calculating the actual hours that we have left in our resources. So this is based off, the 60% utilization and how many hours we believe we have remaining. As you can see, like the IT General's control review, we pulled that from how many hours we have remaining for the rest of the year, which was 10 hours. Oops, sorry. So, yeah, we're confident that unless something happens that was unforeseen, that we can get through the rest of the audit plan by the end of the year. Yeah. Well, we were under hours on.
New engagements too.
Yeah.
So time audits could lead to that.
Yeah, and the hope is, CJIS, Criminal Justice Information Sharing, and Animal Shelter, why we believe will be on budget, or at least close to budget, is we have audited those areas before, 10 years ago, but we don't believe that we should. If we go over, it's because, we have a good reason that it went over, which we'll obviously share with the committee at the time.
So, any other questions? Do we need a motion to approve the revision? I think we do, right? A motion to approve the revised audit plan?
Right.
Any other questions, though, before we pass the?
Mr. Chair, just to comment, I think just we need to reflect in the minutes, we're making this change in part because of the staff vacancy as well as the transition in director. I just want to, I think, justify the rationale why we're making these changes.
And I think, and the amount of the additional time to implement the new standards. That's taken a lot of your guys. I know it's taken a lot of your guys' time, just from the conversations I've had with you. So I think maybe those would be the three primary, yeah. Okay, okay, so all in favor of approving the revised 2024 audit plan, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay.
I seconded, just in case I made the second. You may not have heard it.
Okay, thank you, Sal.
All right.
All right, thank you. So I have 4 minutes, right?
Yeah, good luck.
Excuse me. Item 8D, I'm actually okay deferring this to the September, or the December meeting. Because it's a requirement that we go over this as the audit committee, but we don't have to do it right now. So if the committee's okay, this was actually sent to the committee a couple weeks ago as well. If the committee's okay with that presentation being done in December, or if you have any questions before that meeting, I'd be happy to get on a call with anyone.
Okay.
The 2024 and 25 budget. This might take longer than 4 minutes. But I'll run through it real quick. And that is attachment 8-A-8.E, which should be familiar to the committee. We made a few changes, tweaks to this. So with the 2024 budget, we want to show current projections compared to the current budget and what the audit committee approved for 2024. As you can see, our projections for the total budget for 2024 will be $25,000 lower than the current approved budget. Mostly this is due to the staff auditor vacancy, which is expected to be over 4 months here before we hire a new staff auditor. The audit committee approved a budget of $145,000 more than the current budget. We did show the impact on operations from that difference. It's showed in the bottom right of that page. There was a portion of a part-timer's budget removed from the budget in 2024. That was about $52,000. Staff could not travel for continuing education or receive certifications in 2024, which is about $11,000. And then audit committee contracts and additional IT resources contracts were not entered into during the year because there was no budget for that. And I understand the IT resources contracts, there was a carryover from the risk assessment into this year as well. So that's where, looking at the 2025 budget, I included, I'll go over that in a minute, I included $100,000 more for that IT audit resource for the contracting out because that was the plan, at least here, was to do the assessment 1 year. I contract out the second year to develop the plan and go through an initial work of that audit plan, and then third year hire an IT resource. That was my understanding at least. So just wanted to at least show that. But at least for the 2024 budget, I just wanted to provide an update on that and report that we have sufficient budget to operate through the end of the year here. I'm not recommending any changes to the 2024 budget.
Okay,
Council.
So we approved the budget. County executive submitted a lower budget. The county council approved that budget. About a month or so ago, or a couple months, I don't know, 3 months ago, there was a minor revision made to the county approved budget. But you're proposing another small modification, but you can fit that in within your budget for 2024.
The small modification that it would just be a transfer between, right, Josh, a transfer between personnel services and other expenses to make up for.
And as long as that happens, you're good, and which means the audit committee's good.
Right.
With the 24 budget. Okay. So that small transfer from personnel services to other expenses, that's gonna happen at some point in time pretty soon?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Right, yeah, we've been in discussion with OBM on that process.
Okay.
Yes,
So as a
that's
committee,
expected to happen.
we don't have to worry about the 24 budget for your department?
As far as I'm concerned, no.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, the 2025 budget is on the second page of that attachment. The report shows comparison between the audit committee approved budget, Department of Internal Audit's recommended budget, which is the revised, and executive council approved budget. In personnel services, the IT resource as a full-time employee was removed for 2025. That was in the audit committee approved budget, which creates a small variance there, so we're not worried about personnel services and for the 2025 budget. And other operating, we are recommending a revised budget to the administration of, it would be $20,000 in total for other expenses. That's related to our audit software, our webinars, member certifications, conferences. So we are requesting that that be added. I've been in discussion with Katie, Mike Chambers, and Walter about this, and I've gotten positive feedback, at least on that being added to the budget for 2025. I do have the other item I have in here, and again, this was created before we received the ITGC report from Janice, before I had the discussions with Mr. Johnson and Mr. Mio. I put the $100,000 in there, trying to stay with the plan created by the audit committee and the former director of contracting out the IT audit service. Again, at this point in time, I don't know if that needs to be $100,000, more or less, but in discussions with the IT department, which will be ongoing and as soon as possible, because I understand if we want to get anything in the budget, we need to do it very soon. So right now, I would take that $100,000 out until I have an idea of how that 2025 plan is going to come into place with what ITGC controls we're going to review and test and determine the amount that we'll need if outsourced to an IT contractor. And I understand through even the budget process that if we don't know the exact amount or can't make a decision until the beginning of the year, I can still go back to council and ask for that additional budget for next year, even after the November deadline. Am I correct in saying that, Mr. Chambers?
We adjust the budget every 2 weeks, so yeah, there's no problem.
Okay. So I don't want to make, and I just want to say that because I don't want to make a quick decision here that might create some operational deficiencies in our department and IT's department. I want to make sure that we're all in line and that I have a good idea what the plan is before I recommend a certain dollar amount of an increased budget for 2025.
Okay, so let me try to do a summary on behalf of the committee, if I can try to think of what you're thinking. So on the personnel services and benefits, you're okay with, there's a small potentially a small modification to the county-approved budget because we're okay with deferring the $119,000 that we initially had in the 2024 budget, deferring that because we're kind of behind on the ITGC work.
That's yes.
Okay, so which means you're okay with the personnel services, which I think means we're okay with the personnel services, as long as we understand that's what the change is. And all the other expenses, other than that $100,000, an increase in all those other line items of an amount of about $20,000
Right.
resolves your potential issues, if that's the right terminology, and you think you have an okay already from the executive's office for that $20,000.
That's my understanding, at least talking to the administration.
Yeah, once again, the chances of them losing another employee, we won't make the adjustment till we actually have to do that. So just like you lost someone now for several months, the same thing can happen next year. So we will sit down, like we said, every 2 weeks, we adjust the budget. And when that time comes and we for sure know you need it, we'll make the adjustment.
Okay.
There's no sense doing it now because a lot can happen between now and then.
But philosophically, I'm just trying to figure it out on behalf of the committee. Philosophically, whether or not there's another vacancy or not, it sounds like the administration is okay with a $20,000 increase to the other expenses. How you ultimately get there is
Yeah.
okay. So the $100,000, which is kind of the still remaining big item, you're gonna hold off on a recommendation to the audit committee on the $100,000 until you've had more of an opportunity to sit with, the IT department and either come back with a number less than that or come back with a zero, I don't, come back with something, a discussion.
Right. Yeah, there'll be follow-up on that.
Okay.
There's a lot to even go through with this ITGC matrix that they provided to us too, and again, we just got it. So I don't want to make a rash decision now and ask for an increase when we might not even need that much, or need it at all, I mean, but I want to wait on that a little bit if the committee's okay.
So if the audit committee members understand all of that, and I know there's a lot of pluses and minuses there, do we need to approve anything? Is there any advantage for us formally approving anything, or it's less than the amount we initially approved? Is there any advantage for us to try to approve a number for 2025, or just let things go? Just,
I don't think there's any reason to approve anything.
okay. Okay. Are you done with the budget then? I don't mean to.
Yes.
Gentlemen, okay. All right, so everybody good with the budget for 2024 and 20? Okay. There's been a lot of changes with that. I want to make sure everybody's comfortable with that. All right, why don't you do the staffing and then we'll go to executive session.
The staff auditor vacancy, the next item, we did have 57 applicants, 31 of them were tested. The testing ended on August 30th. We just received the eligibility list Tuesday, and we're gonna work with HR to schedule interviews. So there was at least 10 people on our eligibility list, which I'd have to go back. That might be the most ever on our staff auditor position. So once that's done, we'll hopefully get, or once the interviews come in, hopefully we can get someone in here by mid-October.
So I want to kind of bounce back now on, is there anything else that's, you want to?
The department goals update would be the last one, which that I'm
Just
okay with. I gave you the draft report if you guys have
Any
questions.
emerging risks or anything else that you have to?
No, not
Okay.
to bring up right now.
All right, so I want to go back to item 6 on the agenda, the executive session. So all meetings of the Cuyahoga County Audit Committee are open to the public under the Ohio Open Meetings Act. However, the committee may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During executive session, the committee confers outside of the hearing of the public, but may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All final decisions are made in public. So the committee may enter into executive session to confer with its attorney on disputes involving the committee that are subject of pending or imminent court action. Is there a motion to enter executive session for purposes of gathering information and conferring with counsel about a disputed matter that is a subject of imminent court action?
So moved.
So we need a second, okay. So we need a roll call vote, I think?
Yeah, calling roll, Michael Abuzarol,
Yes?
Trevor McLear,
Yes.
Keith Libman,
Yes.
Salvador Tallarico,
Yes.
and Maltree Sharp.
Yes.
So if I can ask everybody to leave the room other than just the members of the audit committee and Mark and Katie, if you're, I think you're officially on the audit committee. So Corey, I'll text you when we're done.
Okay.
So who's handling the live feed thing? So we are reconvening the meeting of the committee, and we are now back on the record. So I want to just jump back to the agenda. So I am on item 9, public comment unrelated to the agenda. Nobody? So next meeting is Tuesday, December 12th at 9 o'clock. Hopefully everybody can make that meeting, and then we need a motion to adjourn. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.